On a frozen riverbank, where winter's breath cut like knives, a broken German shepherd was dragged out to be sold for scraps. His ribs showed, his spirit nearly crushed, and laughter from the crowd stung sharper than the cold. He was meant to vanish like smoke in the snow, until Daniel Crow, a lone cowboy hardened by 40 winters of silence, stepped forward. What followed, no one could have foreseen. That dog, once discarded, would walk beside Daniel through trials of strength, defiance, and redemption. He would turn a man's solitude into family and teach a weary soul that loyalty can outshine despair. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Share your country in the comments below. The river lay iron still beneath a low sky, winter gnawing the light to a thin blue edge. On that bitter morning, the townsfolk drifted toward the frozen bend as if pulled by a rope none could see, their boots crunching on frost-hardened earth, their breath fogging into little ghosts that rose and vanished. They gathered not from duty, but from hunger for spectacle, the kind of hunger that warms nothing but itself. Silas McCrae stood already at the center, feet braced wide upon the ice, a length of frayed rope looped twice around his fist. He was tall, yet stooped, his frame brittle as a reed left too long in winter winds. His cheeks were pocked, one eyebrow half missing from a mine explosion years earlier, a scar there pink as fish belly flesh. His mustache hung greasy, frozen at the tips into pale hooks. He was a man hardened by liquor and disappointment, a man who had once buried his brother under a collapsed shaft and never again believed the world fair. Greed and bitterness had fermented together in him until cruelty seemed like reason. He chewed at invisible cud between curses and blinked with restless eyes, as if he could still sniff coin somewhere in the snow. At the end of the rope stood the dog, a German shepherd, about 5 winters old, once noble in bearing but now reduced to angles. Hunger had carved him down, so bones wrote their script under his coat. His fur, once sable black over a tawny undercoat, had dulled into clumps, torn at the shoulder where healing skin showed pink. His harness was cracked leather, salt-whitened and stiff, a bald ring rubbed into his chest where the strap had ground skin raw. His ears, once sharp triangles, drooped halfway as if listening cost him strength. His eyes were amber brown, steady but dimmed, still cataloging exits out of habit, though he seemed to know no escape would open. He moved his left forepaw carefully, tender from cracked pads, each step a small negotiation with the ice. He did not answer to a name anymore. The brass tag that once carried Thorn had long since disappeared, leaving him nameless to all but memory. The crowd closed in a ragged circle. Sarah Klein lingered at its edge. Tall and rangy, she had the look of someone built by work rather than abundance. Her wool coat was patched at the cuffs, her auburn hair tied under a faded scarf, stray strands catching on her lips. She was a seamstress with nimble, scarred fingers, a woman who had raised her younger brother after fever took their mother, and then raised herself when that brother left for the lumber camps. Grief had made her practical, but her heart had not turned to stone. She worried a scrap of bread in her pocket, as if debating whether crumbs could change a fate. Near her stood Warren Harlan, the butcher, a mountain of shoulders wrapped in a straining coat. His beard was orderly oak brown, his eyes patient. A crooked scar along his jaw gave his face a permanent frown, but his nature was not cruel. He believed in clean cuts and honest scales, and he watched Silas with cold disapproval, measuring cruelty as if it were spoiled meat. Beside him bounced Jed Latham, a boy of 12, cheeks red with cold, a cap too big for his head. He clutched a stick to his chest like a rifle, eyes bright with greedy curiosity. He had not yet learned that some spectacles cost more to remember than to miss. Others filled the ring. Minnie Boyle, the bakery widow, clutching a sack of stale crusts. Pastor Linley, face long and sorrow-shaped as if carved by grief. Ivy Green, sharp-tongued, delighting in cruelty. They were not individuals, but part of a single appetite. The crowd itself, which hungered to witness suffering dressed as entertainment. Silas jerked the rope, dragging the dog forward. "Come on, you stubborn sack," he barked. His voice was hoarse, lined with whiskey and frost. The dog stumbled, claws scratching the ice, but did not resist. He had learned that resistance was waste. Stillness was his last strength. Silas planted himself and raised his chin. "Hear me now," he shouted. "I got a beast here, no good for pulling anymore. Used to chew the miles like bread, but now he coughs at hills like an old banker. I ain't keeping dead weight. I'll sell him or drown him. Either way, I won't waste another week's feed." The words carried across the frozen river like thrown stones. Sarah flinched. Warren stiffened. Pastor Linley shaped a prayer with lips too tired for sound. Jed grinned, thrilled by the promise of drama. Ivy Green smirked, calling, "Auction then! Let's see who's fool enough to buy him!" The crowd laughed, sharp and joyless. The German shepherd stood silent. His heart still beat, his breath still steamed, and behind his amber eyes small pictures flickered. He remembered the rhythm of pulling a sled through snowy corridors, the hum of wind dropping once he found his pace, the driver's soft songs at dusk. He remembered a glove tossed for him to fetch. Praised foe, the bidding had not yet begun when the wind carried another figure down the frozen road. He came slowly, as though every step marked not just distance but years carried on his back. Daniel Crow was his name, though few in this town spoke it often, for he rarely left the mountain homestead where solitude had carved him into something spare and durable. At 40, his body bore the language of labor. Broad shoulders corded with muscle, hands mapped with old scars, a gait made heavy by winters of snowshoes and axes. His face was cut sharp, cheekbones pronounced, jaw square under a grizzle of black and silver beard cropped close. Lines fanned outward from the corners of his gray eyes, not from laughter, but from squinting against storms. His skin was weather-darkened, and his hair, once raven black, had paled at the temples, giving him the look of a man older than his years. Daniel carried silence with him like a coat, and those who knew him at all said he was not unfriendly but emptied, a man who had poured out words long ago and found the world unthirsty. The crowd noticed him even before he stepped into their circle. Sarah Klein caught her breath, for she had seen him once at her shop door years before, when he bought heavy thread to mend his own coat and said only, "Strong enough for canvas?" She had told herself then that his loneliness walked in front of him like a lantern, and she saw it again now in the slope of his shoulders. Warren Harlan narrowed his eyes, both cautious and curious, for Daniel had a reputation. He never gambled, never drank at the tavern, and never courted a woman. He was a ghost who built his own fences and split his own wood, a man so stubbornly self-reliant that people forgot he still had blood like theirs. Daniel's boots cracked the ice as he stepped forward. He did not glance at Silas McCrae, nor at the sneering Ivy Green, nor at the jeering boys in the back. His eyes found only the dog, standing rope-bound, coat dull, chest heaving shallow. Something flickered across Daniel's weathered face then. Recognition, perhaps, or kinship, for solitude can sometimes smell itself in another being. He paused, and the silence stretched until even Pastor Linley shifted nervously. Then Daniel crouched, the way a man approaches a frightened colt, slow and deliberate. He held out one hand, scarred across the knuckles from years of axe handles and rock, palm open to the shepherd. The dog lifted his head, ears twitching uncertainly. His amber eyes narrowed, searching for cruelty in the stranger's scent. Daniel did not move further, only waited, and in the waiting, the dog found no whip, no tug, only stillness. After a long moment, he leaned slightly forward, breath steaming into Daniel's palm. The crowd murmured, uneasy, for they had come to see an auction, not a communion. Silas laughed harshly, breaking the spell. "Well, look at that," he drawled, mustache crusted with frost. "The hermit's got himself a soft spot. Don't tell me you came down off your mountain for a mutt, Crow." Daniel rose slowly, turning his face toward Silas without expression. His voice, when it came, was low and rough, as if each word had to clear the grit of disuse. "He's no mutt," Daniel said. "He's a life, and he's mine now." The declaration startled the crowd. Sarah gasped softly. Warren lifted his chin, Ivy burst into laughter, and young Jed nearly dropped his stick in excitement. "Yours?" Silas barked. "You got coin then? Show it or shut your jaw. This ain't charity." His eyes glittered with meanness, but also calculation, for he smelled a show that might profit him in wagers. Daniel shook his head. "I won't pay silver for flesh, not beast nor man. I'll not turn a back into a purse." He stepped closer to the dog, pulled the wool blanket from his shoulders, dark and frayed at the hem, yet clean, and draped it gently across the shepherd's back. The dog shuddered once at the unexpected warmth, then lowered his head as though accepting a crown. The gesture sent a ripple through the circle. Some muttered admiration, others hissed. Pastor Linley whispered, "Mercy," as though the word itself might freeze if not spoken aloud. Sarah's eyes glistened, though she pressed her lips tight, unwilling to show softness before Ivy's gaze. Warren grunted approval deep in his beard, but Silas's face turned scarlet. He jerked the rope, trying to pull the shepherd back, but the dog resisted with a sudden growl low in his throat, the first sound of defiance in months. Silas cursed, tugging harder. Daniel's hand shot out and gripped the rope, stopping it mid-strain. His fingers closed like iron, knuckles whitening. "He goes with me," Daniel said evenly. "That's finished." The crowd held its breath. No one ever heard Daniel Crow speak so many words at once. Ivy leaned forward, eyes shining with the thrill of coming conflict. "You can't just take him," she cried. "A vow's one thing, but property's another." Silas sneered. "Exactly. Unless he pays, he steals. You all see it." He looked around, searching for support. Some nodded, others shuffled uneasily. Greed and fear had their own gravity, pulling the crowd back and forth. Sarah found her voice. "He's saving that animal, Silas. You drown it. Which of those is theft?" Her words were brave, but shook slightly, and she wrapped her scarf tighter around her neck, as if to steady herself. Daniel did not thank her, nor look away from Silas. He only said, "I've worked 40 years without wife or kin, not for lack of wanting, but for lack of time and mercy. Today I claim him. You won't lay hand nor rope on him again." Silas's eyes narrowed. "Claim him? You think words are enough? This town don't run on vows, Crow. It runs on silver." He pulled a knife from his belt, short and rust-flecked, more fit for gutting fish than fighting. He held it low, testing its weight. "Maybe you want to prove your claim another way." A hiss ran through the crowd, half anticipation, half fear. Jed bounced on his toes, eyes wide. Ivy clapped once in delight. Pastor Lindley murmured frantic prayers. Warren shifted his stance, prepared to intervene if blood spilled too freely. The shepherd pressed closer to Daniel's leg, blanket slipping. Daniel's hand dropped calmly to rest on the dog's head. His voice came steady, as immovable as the mountains. "Then strike me if you must, but you'll never touch him again." The silence was thick, broken only by the groan of ice under the river's skin. Silas's knife wavered, shame gnawing at his grip, yet he did not lower it. His pride was a cornered wolf, desperate and ugly. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for steel to flash or for reason to hold. But Daniel did not move. He stood like oak rooted deep, a man who had endured storms without breaking, and in his stillness there was strength enough to shame the blade. The dog, sensing something different in this human, exhaled long and low, then sat at his side as though he had chosen his master already. The moment trembled, uncertain which way it would fall, and it ended not in blood, but in a question left to the crowd. Would they honor the vow of a solitary man and the loyalty of a broken dog, or would they demand silver and spectacle? For now, the answer waited, shivering in the frozen air. The silence that followed Daniel's defiance was brittle as the ice that sheeted the Arkansas River. Men shuffled boots against frozen earth, women drew their shawls closer, and the German shepherd pressed against Daniel's leg as though anchoring itself to his steadiness. Silas McCrae's knife wavered, but pride hardened his jaw, and he spat at the snow. Before the tension could collapse into blood, another figure emerged from the throng, his voice sharp as a whip. Amos Pike pushed through the circle. Amos was a man of medium height, but thick through the middle, a merchant whose success came not from muscle, but from cunning. His face was broad and ruddy, framed by thin gray hair that refused to cover his shiny scalp. A crooked hat perched forever lopsided on his head, giving him the air of someone who had once been mocked and now relished mocking others in return. His eyes, small and calculating, rarely blinked, as though always measuring profit in every word spoken. Amos had made his fortune selling tools to prospectors and food to farmers at unfair prices, yet still managed to cloak his greed in the guise of community leadership. People listened to him because they feared being outmaneuvered, not because they respected him. He raised one hand and bellowed, "This won't do. A claim can't be settled on words alone, not in our town, not before this river. If a man says he takes what another would sell, then let him prove it. Not with silver if he refuses, but with strength. Let the town see if his vow has bones." His words found eager ears, for the crowd had grown restless, their hunger for spectacle gnawing louder than their conscience. Ivy Green clapped her hands in delight, her dark curls bouncing. Warren Harlan folded his arms, thick beard bristling, unwilling to approve but unwilling to oppose. Sarah Klein whispered prayers beneath her scarf, torn between hope for Daniel and dread for what cruelty might follow. Daniel stood unmoving, his rough hand resting on the shepherd's back. The dog leaned into his palm, the faint tremor of ribs still shaking under the blanket. Daniel's eyes lifted to Amos Pike, and though his voice remained low, it carried. "What trial would you set?" Amos's mouth curved into a sly grin. "The stone," he declared. "The river stone by the shallows. Let him lift it, above his head, for all to see. Any man who would claim without coin must lift what no other man has raised. Let his vow ride on his strength." The announcement rippled through the gathering like wind over wheat. Gasps, murmurs, laughter. Everyone knew the stone, a boulder smooth with decades of water, sunk deep in the silt near the bank. Boys had dared each other to touch it. Young men had strained their backs trying to budge it, but none had ever lifted it higher than their knees. Silas barked a laugh, knife still in hand. Perfect. Let the hermit split his spine for a cur. Then we'll see if words mean more than silver. His eyes glittered with satisfaction, knowing the task was near impossible. Daniel glanced at the dog, whose ears twitched at the rising jeers. He drew in a breath that seemed to come from deep in his chest, the kind of breath a man takes before felling a tree or breaking ice with an axe. "Then I'll lift it," he said. "And when I do, there'll be no more talk of silver." The crowd surged, pressing close as they made their way to the shallows. The river groaned under its frozen skin, a low rumble that seemed to echo the tension in every chest. The stone lay half buried in icy silt, its slick back gleaming under the pale winter sun. It looked immovable, part of the earth itself. The shepherd whined softly, as though sensing the burden about to be shouldered. Daniel removed his coat, folding it neatly despite the mud. His shirt, rough linen patched in places, clung to shoulders shaped by years of splitting logs and hauling timber. The scars on his forearms caught the light, pale against weather-darkened skin, testimonies of old labors and wounds endured without complaint. He crouched, thick hands digging into the frozen muck around the stone, testing the edge for purchase. Amos Pike raised his arm like a judge. "By this trial shall the truth be proven. Lift it above your head, Crow, and the dog is yours before God and man. Fail, and he returns to his rightful owner." The words rang across the riverbank. Daniel braced himself. His boots sank deep as he bent low, arms locking around the curved edge. The first pull wrenched a groan from the crowd as the stone shuddered, lifting an inch, then slamming back into the earth with a thud that rattled teeth. Men roared with laughter, women gasped, and Ivy clapped in delight at his near failure. "Too heavy," someone shouted. "He'll break his back," another cried. But Daniel only spat into the mud and squared his stance again. He muttered, "40 years alone is heavier than any stone." He heaved once more, veins standing out on his neck, his jaw clenched until his teeth ached. The boulder rose again, higher this time, his arms trembling as the weight fought to crush him. For a heartbeat, it hovered at his chest, and the crowd's laughter faltered into stunned silence. But his boots slipped, the stone thudded back down, spraying mud. The shepherd whimpered, and Daniel's eyes flicked to him. For the first time, he noticed clearly the deep scars in the animal's flank, old welts that crisscrossed beneath the matted fur. Fury ignited in him, not just pity now, but wrath at cruelty endured. He roared, a sound pulled from somewhere primal, and bent again. This time his grip locked, his stance wider, his whole body leaning into the impossible. Slowly, groaning like timber under storm, the stone rose. First to his waist, then chest high, his shoulders quaking. The crowd gasped, pressed tighter, the air alive with disbelief. Amos Pike's crooked hat nearly slipped from his head as he leaned forward, eyes wide. Silas's sneer curdled into dread. Sarah clasped her hands to her lips, whispering through tears. "Above the head!" Amos shouted, desperate to keep control of the trial. "The vow demands above the head!" Daniel staggered, nearly buckling, sweat cutting icy lines down his temples. His arms screamed with fire, but the memory of 40 winters alone, of nights speaking to no one but firewood and walls, rose in him. and with a final cry, he thrust the stone higher, arms locked, holding it above his head for the space of 3 pounding heartbeats. Then he dropped it, the earth shaking under its crash. For a long breath, there was only silence. Then voices burst like thunder. "He did it! Impossible!" "No man can." Some shouted trickery, others cheered, but none could deny what their eyes had seen. Daniel straightened, chest heaving, mud splattered across his arms. He turned not to Amos nor Silas, but to the shepherd at his side. "It's done," he said softly, voice breaking. The dog pressed closer, tail thumping once, as if to say it was understood. The riverbank had not quieted after the lifting of the stone. Though Daniel Crow's triumph should have sealed the matter, the mob, swollen with bloodlust, was not ready to yield its appetite. The German shepherd leaned into Daniel's leg, ribs trembling but spirit awakening, tail brushing the dirt in faint recognition of belonging. For a heartbeat, it seemed enough. But greed rarely concedes gracefully, and Silas McCrae, face flushed purple, would not allow his authority to collapse under the weight of one man's vow. Silas shoved through the throng, waving his arms to be heard. "Don't be fooled," he bellowed, voice cracking with rage. "Stone or no stone, a beast ain't free unless paid for. Crow's nothing but a thief who hides his theft under show." He raised his knife again, though his hand quivered. The crowd responded with restless murmurs, their allegiance split between the miracle they had witnessed and the poison of Silas's claim. Before violence could ignite, Amos Pike lifted his crooked hat and sneered. Maybe the stone proved his strength, he admitted, but vows don't stand on strength alone. Let there be another trial. Let him prove not just muscle but courage, against a man of flesh and bone. If he wins, the dog is his by all eyes present. If he falls, well, his claim dies with him. The crowd roared its approval, stamping their boots against the frozen ground. They craved escalation, a climax worthy of retelling in taverns. Even those uneasy with Silas's cruelty were swept by the current of mob hunger. Sarah Klein gasped and shook her head, pulling her scarf tighter, muttering, "Enough, please, enough," though no one heard her over the rising cries. Warren Harlan grunted disapproval, but remained silent, unwilling to stand against the tide. It was then that a new figure emerged from the back of the throng. He was taller than most, with shoulders like barn beams and arms thick from years of ranch work. His name was Thomas Grady, known by many as Tom the Bull, a ranch hand from the southern range. Tom's face bore the scars of old fights, a crooked nose, split once and healed wrong, a jagged line across his left eyebrow. His eyes were pale blue, cold and restless, and his grin was the cruel kind, born not of joy, but of delight in domination. At 35, Tom had a reputation. He enjoyed brawls the way others enjoyed cards, and no Saturday night passed at the tavern without his knuckles bloodied. His father had been a brute who worked him harder than horses, and when he died beneath a stampede, Tom inherited not wisdom, but the taste for violence, wearing it like a badge. Amos gestured toward him with satisfaction. "There's your challenger. Tom Grady will stand for the town." The crowd erupted, some jeering, others cheering, their breath steaming in the cold air. Tom rolled his shoulders and spat into the snow, grinning at Daniel. "About time I had something worth hitting," he growled. Daniel stood silent, the shepherd pressed at his side. His lip was split from strain, mud streaked across his shirt, but his eyes were steady. He placed one hand gently on the dog's neck and whispered so low it was nearly lost. "Stay." The shepherd obeyed, settling, as if the simple command was a thread binding them. Then Daniel stepped forward, squaring his stance. "I'll not kill a man for sport," he said, his voice even as stone, "but I'll fight to protect what I've claimed." The mob widened its circle, boots crunching ice into mud, anticipation thick as storm clouds. Amos raised his hand, relishing his role as master of ceremony. "Then let the trial be settled in fists. Witness it all. If Crow stands, the vow holds. If he falls, the claim dies." Tom lunged first, fast despite his size, swinging wide with a fist meant to shatter jaws. Daniel pivoted, the punch grazing past his cheek, and drove his own fist into Tom's ribs. The sound was dull and heavy, and Tom grunted but grinned wider. "Not bad, old man," he spat. "But you've got 40 winters slowing you?" He circled, fists up, every inch the predator who thrived on spectacle. The next clash was harder. Tom's fist caught Daniel across the mouth, splitting his lip wider, blood blooming crimson. The crowd howled, stamping, chanting his name. Daniel staggered but did not fall. He steadied his breath, eyes never leaving Tom's, silent as always. Tom jeered. "You stand for a cur? I'll break you for a dog." He lunged again, but Daniel blocked, absorbing the blow against his forearm, gritting his teeth as pain radiated. He countered with a strike to Tom's jaw, sending the ranch hand reeling back. The shepherd barked once, sharp, tail rigid, as if urging him on. Sarah covered her mouth, tears in her eyes, whispering prayers to no one in particular. Warren muttered, "Hold steady, Crow," under his breath, though he kept arms folded. Ivy cheered louder, desperate for blood. Amos's eyes gleamed. Spectacle was good for his grip on power. The fight dragged, mud flying as they grappled, fists cracking against flesh. Tom landed another strike that bent Daniel to his knees, and the crowd shrieked in anticipation of his fall. Mara, no, not Mara here, but the shepherd, whimpered, tugging at the rope as though to leap into the fray. Daniel heard the sound, faint but piercing, and something broke open in him. For years he had endured silence and solitude, speaking only to walls, to wind, to himself. But now one creature depended on him wholly, and that was enough. With a roar that startled even Tom, Daniel surged upright, catching his opponent's wrist mid-swing. He twisted until bone cracked, and Tom howled, dropping to his knees. Daniel drove his fist into Tom's chest, with the weight of 40 years of loneliness forged into iron. Tom collapsed into the mud, gasping for breath, his grin gone, his strength scattered. The circle held its breath. Amos, cornered by the crowd's own eyes, raised his crooked hat high. "Enough! The trial is met. The cowboy stands. The challenger falls." His words were grudging, but binding, for even greed must bow before a truth witnessed by all. Daniel stood bloodied but unbowed, chest heaving, fists unclenching. He turned not to Amos nor Silas, but to the shepherd, saying loud enough for all to hear, "He's mine, not because I fought for him, but because he chose to stay." The crowd shifted uneasily, some muttering admiration, others spitting into the mud. But the vow, sealed in stone and in blood, could not be denied. The German shepherd pressed against his leg once more, eyes lifted to his, tail thumping. And though the mob still rumbled with discontent, Daniel Crow knew the bond between man and dog had already been written deeper than any coin could buy. The riverbank was still alive with murmurs after Tom Grady lay sprawled in the mud, groaning, his strength shattered by Daniel Crow's final blow. The German shepherd pressed against Daniel's thigh, trembling but resolute, amber eyes fixed on the man who had refused to abandon him. For a moment, it seemed the vow had been proven beyond dispute, first by stone, then by blood. Yet men consumed by greed cling to their claims tighter than wolves to a carcass, and Silas McCrae was no different. Silas forced his way back into the circle, his heavy boots splashing mud, his mustache quivering with fury. His broad face was ruddy, pitted with old scars from drunken brawls, and his eyes, a hard slate gray, burned with desperation. He had once been respected as a hunter who provided meat for the winters, but years of cruelty and debt had twisted him into a bitter man. Raising a torn scrap of paper above his head, he shouted, "You think fists and rocks undo this? I got her right here. Proof of claim." The crowd leaned closer, uncertain. Silas shook the page, the ink blotched from age and damp, a contract signed with some wandering broker who sold labor and beasts alike. "This dog was bred for service, promised to me in Denver, written and sealed. You can't break paper with sweat." Gasps rippled through the mob. The shepherd barked sharply, as if sensing the insult. Daniel's jaw tightened. His voice came low but carried like a storm rolling down the mountainside. Paper that binds life to coin is no contract, only a chain. And chains don't hold here. His eyes bored into Silas's, steady and unyielding. Before Silas could retort, a figure stepped forward from the press of townsfolk. It was Martha Hale, the widow with silver hair bound tightly beneath a black kerchief. Martha had lived 60 winters, her back bent but her gaze fierce. Her skin was seamed with age and sun, and her mouth was drawn thin from years of silence, for she spoke rarely and always with purpose. Her husband had died in a mining collapse 2 decades earlier, after Silas himself had urged him into unsafe tunnels for quick profit. Since then, Martha carried herself with a cane in one hand and judgment in her eyes. She struck the cane against the frozen earth with a crack. "Enough," she declared. "I saw him lift the stone higher than any man ever did. I saw him stand when a younger, stronger fell. That dog is his by vow and by trial. Paper soaked in greed is no law I'll honor." The mob faltered under her words. Martha Hale was not beloved, but her integrity was unquestioned. Even Ivy Green's smirk thinned, and Warren Harlan grunted agreement, folding his arms more tightly. Amos Pike shifted uneasily, knowing his entertainment was slipping into judgment. But Silas raged louder, his face twisted, eyes bulging. "You fools! You'll let a hermit shame me? He thinks he can walk in and steal what's mine? I raised that beast, broke his back to pull my sled, and I'll drag him again till his spirit cracks." He lunged forward, hands clawing for the shepherd's rope. The dog yelped, scrambling back, but Daniel moved faster, seizing Silas by the collar. With one hand, he hauled the heavier man from the ground, boots dangling inches above the mud. His voice thundered, "You'll never touch him again, not while I draw breath." His words rang so sharp that even Amos Pike dared not mock. The contract fluttered from Silas's hand, landing in the mud. The shepherd stepped forward, placing one paw upon the page as though claiming his own verdict. A hush fell. Sarah Klein, her scarf damp with tears, whispered, "Let it end here." She was tall and thin, with dark auburn hair pulled tight, her skin pale from winters indoors. A shopkeeper by trade, she carried kindness hidden beneath reserve, for she had been betrayed once by a drunken husband who left her for the Dakota frontier. Now she spoke softly, but her voice trembled with conviction. "Let the vow stand. Let mercy count for more than silver." Others nodded, shame creeping through the mob like a thaw. Warren growled, "Crow earned it! No more games!" Even Pastor Linley, hesitant until now, raised his voice in solemn tone. "Before God and men, it is done." Silas flailed in Daniel's grip, spitting curses that rang more pitiful than fierce. Daniel shoved him backward into the mud, where he sprawled, his mustache dripping filth. The paper crumpled further under the shepherd's paw, the ink smearing into nothingness. Daniel turned to the people, chest heaving but voice steady. "This man is no master, only a jailer. He starved the dog, chained him with shame, and called it ownership. But today you all saw, the chains are broken. He chose me, and I chose him. That bond is worth more than any coin or contract." The German shepherd pressed close, tail wagging weakly but with new pride. For the first time in months, perhaps years, his eyes held not only fear but trust. The crowd, at last, swayed toward silence, the fever of spectacle drained. Amos Pike, seeing no profit left, raised his crooked hat with forced authority. "Then let it be sealed. The vow stands. The stone has spoken. The blood has spoken. The people have seen. The dog belongs to Crow." Martha Hale tapped her cane once more, as though to bless the declaration. Sarah lowered her scarf, exhaling relief. Warren gave a single nod, beard bristling. Ivy rolled her eyes but said no more. The mob began to drift back toward the town, their hunger for cruelty slaked by truth they could not deny. Silas remained slumped in the mud, his contract ruined, his pride shattered. He muttered bitter curses, but no one heeded him. The shepherd shook free of the rope and leaned against Daniel's leg, the wool blanket slipping across his shoulders like a mantle of dignity restored. As the river groaned beneath its ice and the wind cut across the bank, Daniel bent, draped his coat back, over his shoulders, and looked down at the dog. "Come on," he said softly, voice rough but gentler than it had been in years. The shepherd padded at his side, each step more certain than the last. Together they turned from the river, walking toward the long climb back to the mountain cabin, away from shame, toward a life forged by vow, not silver. And so, on that frozen riverbank, where cruelty once laughed and chains once clattered, something greater than strength or defiance was revealed. It was not just the lifting of stone, nor the clash of fists, but the quiet miracle of mercy, that one broken creature and one lonely man could find each other, and in their choosing, both be redeemed. Some call it luck, others call it fate, but I believe it was the hand of God moving gently through the storm, reminding us that even in the harshest winters, His grace plants seeds of hope. Perhaps the true miracle was not the stone raised above Daniel's head, nor Silas cast into the mud, but the simple wag of a tail, the trust of a heart once beaten into silence, now healed by love. In that trust, we glimpse what the Lord asks of us every day, to care for the least of His creatures, to see value where the world sees none, and to stand for mercy even when it costs us dearly. And maybe as you go about your own life, walking your quiet streets, tending your families, carrying your own invisible stones, you might remember this. No act of kindness is wasted, no broken spirit is beyond God's healing, and no vow of love is ever too small for heaven to hear. If this story touched you, share it with a friend. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us by subscribing for more stories where love and courage shine through the frost. And may the Lord bless you, guide your steps, and keep you safe, just as He watched over Daniel and his faithful companion on that frozen river.